This is why the Ethiopian Bible got banned. Can you think of a Bible so different, so controversial, so filled with forbidden knowledge that religious authorities tried to erase it from history? Imagine sacred texts that include books about fallen angels mating with humans, detailed accounts of heaven and hell that contradict official doctrine, and prophecies that powerful institutions wanted suppressed. This is not some apocryphal conspiracy theory. This is the Ethiopian Bible, also known as the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo canon, and it is the oldest and most complete Bible in existence, with 88 books compared to the 66 in the Protestant Bible and 73 in the Catholic Bible. The Ethiopian Bible contains texts that were systematically removed, banned, and hidden by Western Christianity. Today we will explore exactly what is in these forbidden books, why they were considered so dangerous, and how one ancient church in the highlands of Ethiopia preserved what the rest of Christianity tried to destroy. The Ethiopian Bible is extraordinary for several reasons. First, it is written in Ge'ez, an ancient Semitic language that has been dead for over 1,000 years except for its continued use in Ethiopian Orthodox liturgy. Second, it includes books that were banned from the biblical canon during the Council of Laodicea in 364 CE and subsequent church councils. Third, many scholars believe the Ethiopian version preserves older and more authentic versions of certain texts than the Greek or Hebrew manuscripts that form the basis of Western Bibles. The Ethiopian Church claims an unbroken lineage back to the 1st century, when Philip the Evangelist baptized the Ethiopian eunuch as described in the Book of Acts. This ancient connection may explain why they preserved texts that later Christianity deemed too dangerous for common believers. The most controversial book in the Ethiopian Bible is the Book of Enoch. This ancient text, completely absent from Catholic and Protestant Bibles, tells a story so shocking that early church fathers worked tirelessly to suppress it. The Book of Enoch describes how a group of angels called the Watchers descended to earth and were overcome by lust for human women. These angels, led by Azazel and Semjaza, took human wives and produced offspring called the Nephilim, giants who were neither fully angel nor fully human. These hybrid beings grew to enormous size and strength, and they corrupted humanity by teaching forbidden knowledge. The Watchers taught humans warfare, weapons making, cosmetics, sorcery, astrology, and other arts that God had not intended humans to possess. According to Enoch, this angelic rebellion and the corruption it brought was the real reason God sent the Great Flood. It was not merely human wickedness, but the fundamental corruption of human bloodlines through mixture with angelic beings that required total destruction and a fresh start with Noah's family. The Book of Enoch provides detailed names of the fallen angels, describes their individual crimes, and explains how God sent the archangels Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel to bind these fallen angels in darkness until the final judgment. Why would church authorities want to ban this book? The implications are enormous. If angels could fall and rebel against God, if they could mate with humans and create hybrid offspring, if they could teach forbidden knowledge, then the nature of good and evil, free will, and divine authority becomes far more complicated than the simplified theology the institutional church wanted to promote. The Book of Enoch suggests that evil in the world is not just the result of human choice, but also the result of direct, supernatural corruption. It implies that there are beings and knowledge that exist in realms beyond human understanding, realms that religious authorities might not fully control or comprehend. Furthermore, the Book of Enoch contains detailed descriptions of heaven and hell based on Enoch's personal tours of these realms guided by angels. These descriptions often contradict the simpler heaven and hell mythology that later Christianity developed. Enoch describes multiple levels of heaven, intricate cosmic geography, and complex hierarchies of angels. This level of detail threatened the authority of church leaders who wanted to be the sole interpreters of divine mysteries. If anyone could read Enoch's first-hand account of the celestial realms, they might question why they needed priests and bishops to explain the afterlife to them. The second major controversial inclusion in the Ethiopian Bible is the Book of Jubilees, also called Lesser Genesis. This text retells the stories of Genesis and Exodus, but adds significant details that are absent from the canonical version. Jubilees provides specific dates for biblical events, describes angels as actively involved in earthly affairs, and includes laws and commandments not found in the standard Torah. The book emphasizes a 364-day solar calendar rather than the lunar calendar used by other Jewish and Christian traditions, which created conflicts over when to celebrate holy days. Most controversially, the Book of Jubilees expands on the Genesis account of angels and human women. It confirms and elaborates on the story told in Enoch, providing additional details about the Nephilim and the corruption they caused. It also emphasizes ritual purity, laws, and strict separation between the righteous and the wicked to a degree that made it problematic for a church trying to convert Gentiles and expand its membership. The Ethiopian Bible also includes the Book of Esdras, the Book of Maccabean, and expanded versions of books like Daniel that contain additional chapters and verses not found in Western Bibles. These editions often include apocalyptic visions, prophecies about the end times, and revelations about the nature of God and creation that complicate official doctrine. So why were these books banned? The answer lies in the politics and theology of early Christianity. As Christianity spread through the Roman Empire, church leaders faced a dilemma. They needed to unify diverse communities with different traditions and texts under a single authority structure. They needed to combat what they considered heresies and ensure theological consistency. And they needed to make Christianity accessible and acceptable to Roman culture. The Council of Laodicea in 364 CE and subsequent councils established which books would be considered canonical scripture and which would be rejected. The criteria were complex, but certain patterns emerge. Books that were too Jewish in their emphasis on law and ritual were problematic, because the church was moving away from Jewish practices. Books that were too mystical or contained too much esoteric knowledge were dangerous because they could undermine clerical authority. Books that suggested too much angelic or demonic agency in human affairs were concerning because they complicated the theology of sin, redemption, and free will that the church was developing. The Book of Enoch was particularly targeted. By the 4th century, most copies had been destroyed or lost in the Western world. Only fragments survived in Greek and Latin. Church fathers like Jerome and Augustine expressed skepticism about Enoch's authenticity and warned against its use. Gradually, it disappeared from the Christian canon except in Ethiopia, where the church maintained its independence from Roman Catholic and Byzantine Orthodox authority. Ethiopia's geographic isolation helped preserve these texts. Located in the highlands of East Africa, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church developed largely independent of the theological controversies and political pressures that shaped European Christianity. When church councils in Rome, Constantinople, and elsewhere were determining the biblical canon, Ethiopian Christians continued using the texts they had received from their earliest evangelization. They saw no reason to remove books that had been part of their tradition for centuries, simply because foreign church authorities now deemed them problematic. The Ethiopian church also had a different theological perspective. They placed greater emphasis on the reality of spiritual warfare, the activity of angels and demons in the world, and the mystical dimensions of faith. The books that Western Christianity found too strange or too dangerous fit naturally within Ethiopian Christian worldview. The stories of the Watchers and Nephilim were not problematic, metaphors to be explained away, but real events that explained the presence of evil in the world. When European colonialism brought Catholic and Protestant missionaries to Ethiopia in later centuries, they were shocked by what they found. Here was an ancient Christian church that claimed apostolic succession and had preserved Christianity through Islamic conquests and centuries of isolation. Yet their Bible contained books the missionaries had never seen. The Catholic Church attempted to bring Ethiopian Christians into conformity with Rome, insisting they abandon their extra books and accept the Catholic canon. The Ethiopians refused. They argued, quite reasonably, that their version was older and more complete, and they saw no reason to mutilate their scriptures to match a later European standard. Protestant missionaries had similar experiences. They brought Bibles translated into Amharic and other Ethiopian languages, but based on the Protestant canon of 66 books. Ethiopian Christians looked at these incomplete Bibles and asked where the Book of Enoch was, where Jubilees was, where all the missing pieces had gone. The missionaries tried to explain that these books were not truly scripture, but the Ethiopians, who had been Christian for over 1,000 years, were not impressed by the theological arguments of European newcomers. The banning of the Ethiopian Bible's extra books reflects larger patterns in religious history. Throughout history, institutions have sought to control access to sacred knowledge. The Catholic Church kept the Bible in Latin and forbidden vernacular translations for centuries. They created the Index of Forbidden, books that banned texts deemed dangerous to faith or morals. They prosecuted and executed people for owning or translating unauthorized scriptures. The reasons are always similar. Sacred texts give readers direct access to religious knowledge and experience. They allow individuals to form their own interpretations and understandings. This threatens hierarchical religious structures that depend on controlling the interpretation and distribution of sacred knowledge. If everyone can read about Enoch's journeys through heaven, they might wonder why they need a priest to tell them about the afterlife. If everyone can read detailed accounts of angels teaching forbidden knowledge to humans, they might start asking uncomfortable questions about what else might be hidden from them. The rediscovery of the Book of Enoch in the West is a fascinating story in itself. In 1773, Scottish explorer James Bruce traveled to Ethiopia and returned with 3 copies of the Book of Enoch in Ge'ez. This was the first time Western scholars had access to a complete version in over 1,000 years. The text was eventually translated into English in 1821, causing controversy and fascination in equal measure. Later discoveries of Enoch, fragments among the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947, confirmed that the Book of Enoch had indeed been widely read and considered authoritative by Jewish communities in the centuries before Christ. This vindicated the Ethiopian church's claim that they had preserved authentic ancient texts, not later forgeries. The Dead Sea Scrolls contained portions of Enoch in Aramaic, proving the text predated Christianity and had been valued by the Essene community that produced the scrolls. Today, scholars recognize the Ethiopian Bible as an invaluable window into early Jewish and Christian thought. The books it preserves show us what first-century believers actually read and believed. Before later church councils decided to standardize and simplify, they reveal a worldview far stranger and more complex than the sanitized version presented in modern churches. They show us a cosmos populated by warring angels and demons, by giants and hybrid beings, by multiple levels of heaven and intricate divine bureaucracy. The banning of these books removed dimensions of mystery, wonder, and terror from mainstream Christianity. It made the faith more manageable, more easily taught, more compatible with Roman and later European culture. But it also removed texts that millions of early believers considered sacred and true. The Ethiopian church, by preserving what others destroyed, maintained a link to this older, wilder version of Christianity. Whether you believe these books are divinely inspired, scripture, or merely ancient religious literature, their suppression represents a loss. They are windows into how our ancestors understood the cosmos, the spiritual realm, and humanity's place in creation. They show us that official religious narratives are always the result of political decisions, theological debates, and institutional power. What gets included and what gets banned tells us as much about the banners as about the texts themselves. If this exploration of forbidden biblical texts fascinated you, subscribe to our channel for more investigations into suppressed history and hidden knowledge. Hit that like button if you found this examination of the Ethiopian Bible eye-opening. Share this video with anyone interested in biblical history, ancient texts, or the politics of religious authority. And let us know in the comments. Had you heard of the Book of Enoch before? Do you think these books should have remained in the biblical canon? What other suppressed religious texts should we explore? Thanks for watching, and remember, what has been hidden can still be found by those willing to search.